Today I'm speaking with Shane Almgren. Shane, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, sir.
Absolutely. You're one of the few people whom I've interviewed twice now. In your first interview, we talked a lot more about you, about your journey out of Christianity and some of your crazy experiences. And again, that link for that interview will be beneath this interview. So please do check out that one. But you are the author of several books, and we're going to talk about your newest book today. But before we get into that, let me just mention a couple things about you. Shane is originally from Texas. He currently lives in Nashville, Tennessee, so not far from me. I should get up there sometime and meet up with you for a cup of coffee. He's the owner, founder, and executive creative director at Shane Almgren Multimedia and Entertainment, which is a boutique design company. His three books include Conspiracy Christianity, the seven evangelical training principles that promote wild propaganda, dangerous misinformation, and outlandish conspiracy theories. That's quite a title. That's a mouthful. Uh,
Mouthful.
the, the second one is the Trumpland Diary, a journal of bigly proportions. And you did work at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago before. We talked about that in the first interview. That must have been quite an experience. And the newest book just came out last month,
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. It's called Desperados: The Insane True Story of Undercover Missionaries, Counterfeit Rock Stars, and the Music Hoax of the Century. And that's what we're going to talk about today. That is a great title too. I love you've got these huge titles, but like every part of it is awesome. Shane grew up in a fundamentalist, evangelical, charismatic Christian home. He was the son of missionaries and of a preacher. He himself was once a worship leader and was a missionary in Asia. He studied at Palm Beach Atlantic University, focusing on journalism and psychology. So that's what I know about you so far, Shane. Before we get into your story and talk about your newest book, tell us more about yourself.
Well, here's a crazy thing is we're going to talk about all the insane nonsense I did. I spent a whole bunch of my life just accumulating nonsensical stories, and I've decided that for the next portion of my life, what I really want to do is get into motivational speaking. I want to take all the nonsense that I did and try to find out what the meaning is and encourage other people to, because we're going to talk about a book today that was insane stuff. It's anything is possible. You are capable of a whole lot, and that's my desire is just to go encourage other people to find out what they're capable of.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. I've got some aspirations for that behind the scenes too, with some affirmation channels, and it makes a difference. It really does. You gotta figure out how to find your positive thinking and find your power and your autonomy, and just it's awesome. The self talk part of this of life is so critical. Well, I look forward to that when you do get that platform, whatever that looks like when you do launch it. Please let me know. We'll do a third interview. You'll be the
Oh, going for the trifecta. All right.
exactly. Well, again, as we get into your book, I'd love to hear your story. I've read the overall story that's that's kind of summarized on Amazon.
Mhm.
But before we get into that, could you give us maybe 5 minutes of just summarizing your personal journey, kind of like what we talked about in depth in the first interview, and then transition us into your book.
Sure. All right. So, like you said, I grew up in a very fundamentalist Christian background. And then after I came to Nashville, what is the term people are using? Not deconstructing, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
deconstructing is more like analyzing it and tearing it
yeah,
apart. Deconversion means I'm out.
I deconverted. I retired, sold the farm, got the gold watch. Um, but I always retained like I didn't have the animosity that a lot of people did, where they go like militant atheist about the thing. I always just had just a fondness for the upbringing, some of like the church culture. Like there was some stuff that, I wouldn't want to repeat, but there was a lot of stuff that was really, it was just good, wholesome kind of, yeah, I loved it. And what I've tried to do is maintain a healthy relationship with all those people. I obviously, anytime we change our minds and there's the in group, they're going to think we went off the rails, and some people are just going to be embarrassed for us and tell their friends, man, I wish I didn't know that guy. Um, and I think that probably happens a lot still anyways, but I kind of wanted to be a person that people weren't embarrassed to admit to other people that they knew. So
Mhm.
that's what I'm working on. I haven't got it exactly right. Um,
Yeah,
Making a
that's
lot of
awesome.
mistakes away, but yeah, there we are.
I love it. Love it. Great stuff. How long ago did you deconvert, by the way?
I started my journey in about 2004, so like 20 years ago.
Okay, gotcha. So you've got quite a few years on me. I often wonder like how the perspective on that process changes as you're further and further removed from it. Like, I talk to people that will comment like, "Hey, I've been out for 40 years." I'm like, I wonder what life looks like when you've been an atheist or agnostic atheist for 40 years. I bet it's a very different perspective after so much time. So it sounds
Yeah,
like you probably had
that's
more time than me, and I'm sure you got more insights on it. Well, if you could, take us back to this book again. The name of the book that we're going to go into today is Desperados, the insane true story of undercover missionaries.
shameless plug.
Please, yeah.
There we go. There.
Counterfeit rock stars and the music hoax of the century. And again, I'll have the link beneath it. Please go buy it. But take us away. What happened in this crazy story?
Okay, so when I was a young kid, my family lived in China. We were missionaries in a little town called Changsha in Hunan Province, South Central China. And we were there, it was the late 80s, and it was right around the time that the Tiananmen Square massacre happened. Um, if you guys don't remember what this was, there was a student protest that started in China, started in the city that we lived in, and it eventually made its way throughout the country. Um, and in Beijing, in Tiananmen Square, there was 100,000 students gathered in a peaceful protest. They were protesting for, uh, it was a pro-democracy movement. And the Communist Party had been unable to get them to disperse. And so they declared martial law and sent the military in. And on June 4th, 1989, the military just opened fire and just massacred the students. What was reported in the media across the world was somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 kids had got killed. We later found out, many years later, through an internal report leaked by one of the British ambassadors, that the number was probably closer to 10,000. Once that happened, the Chinese Communist Party's official position was nothing happened here, and the entire globe is lying about it. Because they didn't like stories were circulating inside of China, and China didn't want anybody calling home or writing letters, so they kicked all of the Westerners uh, out of out of the country. And it didn't matter if you were from America or New Zealand or Germany. They didn't care if you were a Westerner, if you were a white person. They just kicked you out because they didn't want the story getting out. And they said, don't talk about what you've seen or heard, and do not ever come back.
Hmm.
And there was just one problem. It's my mother believed that God had given her a divine mission to organize the first ever Christian concert to China, where Christian activity of any kind is like forbidden over there. You can't do it. Like even when you go in as a missionary, you have to go in like on the hush hush. There's a couple backdoor channels of how you get in, but you don't go into China and you don't do anything Christian. Secondly, there had only been one Western concert in China in their whole history. In 1985, a group called Wham, which there's a singer by the name of George Michael, and he went on to have a very stellar solo career that his partner Andrew Ridgeley didn't have. But George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley were a band called Wham, and their manager, Simon Napier Bell, had spent about 18 months trying to figure out how to get them in because there was a competition between like them, Duran, the Rolling Stones, Queen at the time. They were all vying to be the first band. No one had ever played China. And everyone that was kind of like jockeying positions with each other, they thought, well, if we can be the first one to play China, then we win against our other band members. So Wham had gone in 85, and after that, China didn't let anybody else in. So it was impossible, basically, to go do a music performance. And it was also impossible to go do anything Christian. And my mom said, "Nah, Christian band. We're gonna do both of those things, and we're gonna do a Christian band." And that's kind of where this whole story started because my mom wasn't a music promoter. She didn't work in like before we went to China, she was a first grade teacher. She went straight from high school into the Air Force. She got out of the Air Force, used her GI Bill to get a teaching degree. So that's all she knew. We were from little town, Wichita Falls, Texas. She was a first grade teacher, and she's like, I'm going to orchestrate the first ever Christian concert to China. And we were like, okay, mom, go for it. We'll stand back here and cheer you on. We think you're absolutely crazy. There's no possible way you're going to be able to pull this off. My mother does not care that what you're telling her is possible or isn't possible. She has no, if you're not encouraging her to do whatever mission she's on, she does not have time for your excuses and she doesn't want to hear it. And it was two kinds of impossible and seven kinds of illegal, and she didn't want to hear why. She was going to go do it anyways. So
Wow. That's
at
crazy.
the at the time, she was working at a Christian school in Pittsburgh, where we lived, Pittsburgh East. And Pittsburgh East did a concert series like once a month. They were one of these like the kind of not a mega church, but I mean it was a really big auditorium, like big enough where you could have bands come in, musical acts, performances. Like I remember going there and seeing John Jacobs and the Power Team, the guys that like tear phone books in half and bend bars and stuff. Um, so it was a pretty big church, and my mother I think that I don't remember what the band was that had performed there, but she just called them. She goes, "Hey, this is like a really big band on the national scene. How did you guys like? How do I get in contact if I wanted to book a band? How do I go about doing that?" She had no idea. Like, just starting from scratch, just start making phone calls and see what happens. Somebody gave her the name of a guy in Nashville here, Scott Huey, who was the manager of a really big, at the time, it was the biggest band in Christian music. It was the Newsboys. Um,
Yeah.
they're from Queensland, Australia. Uh, Came here, but by the middle 90s, they had released like five or six records that all, I mean, they were critical hits. Like half the songs on every record was getting airplay. Like they were like a legit, they were playing arenas, they were playing stadiums. I think at one point their lead singer Peter Furler had given an interview because they just played the Astrodome. So like this wasn't like this wasn't a college band. When you're
Yeah.
playing the Astrodome, you're freaking legit.
I actually saw them in concert once myself. I went to it was a Josh McDowell concert, if you know that name. He was preaching about the virtues
Evidence that
of
demands a verdict. Yes, that was big. That was
well,
essential reading.
this was actually, yeah, that was a big deal. This was actually a concert focused on his book Why Wait, which was promoting abstinence. And so he was preaching basically about, don't fantasize, don't lust, and don't have sex till you're married. Just kind of that was the whole preaching. But it was like, an hour of Newsboys and then an hour of Josh McDowell. But it was they were an incredibly amazing group, and some of their songs I can still remember them in my head. Like I just listened to them yesterday. They were, I mean, they had a big influence on my life too.
Well, even like one of the things that we joke about, because I work in the music industry, and there's kind of a running joke that if you can't make it in pop music, you go country, and if you can't make it in country, you go gospel. And the joke is that as you go down the tier, like the quality isn't quite as good because it's the people that didn't make it here and then they didn't make it here. Their musicianship and songwriting quality was, I think, on par with the best secular music. I mean, it was really good stuff. Like I'll still listen to it, like just for fun, because I mean they got great songs. So, anyways, their manager told my mom that because of the unique opportunity to be able to go into China, that they would do it for what they wouldn't ask for what they usually got, which was either a percentage of ticket sales or like a stipend, like a flat fee. But it was tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars is usually what they would get for a show. And they told my mom, look, if you can cover the airfare, cover the hotels, cover the meals, cover the lodging, cover the transportation, we will go for free. And is that amenable to you? And my mom's like, yeah, that sounds great. My mom has no idea how much it costs to fly a band. Like, how many are we talking about? Is it just the six band members? Like, how many roadies did, like, what is the crew size? Like, this is a potentially like handy, like crippling financial burden. And my mom was like, we'll figure that's a tomorrow problem. For her, everything was a tomorrow problem. If it doesn't concern me right now, I'm not going to waste my time thinking about it.
I got to
So
admit, the way you describe your mother, I know where some of this stuff is like kind of horrifying what happened, but
mhm.
I've got to admit, I've got a little bit of respect growing for the fact that she's just like, you can't say no. Like, I will not take no for an answer. I think that there's some aspects that I'm pretty jealous
it,
of.
it is one of my favorite people, uh, motivational people is David Goggins. I don't know if you know who that is.
No,
He's an ex-Navy SEAL who does the ultra marathons, and I mean he's always going off to extreme conditions and running 130 miles. It's just like he's one of the baddest dudes on the planet. Like his mental toughness, it's like next level. I put my mom in this category with David Goggins. Uh, she's insane. And like whatever she decides she's going to do, she just goes and does it. Like I said, she does not care who's telling you it's not possible. You think it's not possible. You go sit down and be quiet. And in the meantime, I'm gonna be I'm gonna be over here doing it. So, after when we got kicked out of China and they'd said, nobody who is here is allowed to come back. My mom said, well, screw it, I'm going back. I've got to meet somebody in China that will facilitate this band idea I've got. And so she just went over there by herself, didn't speak Mandarin, had no idea what she was going to do. She was like, her plan was, let's just let the plane land and then I'll get off and I'll just start walking around and let's see what happens.
was that mostly like just her sense of God's going to work it out sovereignly? Is that what was behind that?
It was all right. I give her a hard time. I call her Mr. Magoo. She hates this. Um, because she's always constantly like sort of wandering through situations and not paying any attention to the trail that she's leaving behind her. So when you've got that adorable sort of cluelessness, but also this firm belief that God is going to guide your path and that no weapon formed against us shall stand. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah, she would go do things that like, even for those of us that believed the same thing about God that she believed, we're like, okay, but there's stupid situations we maybe want to not put ourselves in. And all the sane Christians were over here not carefully not putting ourselves in those positions. And then mom's over here and she's like, nah, I'm going. And we're like, okay, mom, we'll pray for you. See you later. Um, so she went to China by herself, and I'd had to dedicate a whole chapter to what she went through. It was nuts. She got there, and about 15 minutes after stepping off the plane, she was trying to get a taxi to the hotel that she had booked, but she didn't speak any Chinese. The taxi driver didn't speak English, and so my mom did that very American thing where if the person doesn't speak your language, and if you think if you yell it, if you say it louder, then they'll get it. And so she's talking to him in English. He's not getting it. So she's screaming. And eventually, some random kid just came up to her and he said, "Excuse me, I'm here on to visit my family. I study in Australia. Um, so my English is very good. Can I help you? Can I be of assistance?" And my mom tells him, I just tell the cab driver I'm trying to get to the hotel. And he goes, is there anything else I can help you with while I'm here? And she goes, well, I'm over here trying to organize a concert. I'm trying to bring a band here. And he's like, that's very interesting. And he gives her his business card. And he says, if you decide you need anything, just give me a call. I'm happy to help. And she ends up calling him 2 days later, and he knows, or his dad happened to know somebody in the Cultural Affairs Bureau at the city. And he's like, oh, if you want to bring a band here, I know the person you've got to talk to. I will take you there personally, and I will introduce you, and you can explain it to him. So my mom goes to this meeting, and she goes, she was so uncomfortable because the kid that brought her there and the guy he was bringing her there to meet, they were just shooting back and forth in Mandarin for about 20 minutes. And he hadn't stopped to introduce her. They were just blah, 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 like this. And my mom's sitting there and she's going, at any point, like, do they remember I'm in the room? Is somebody going to ask me like what's going to happen? And at the end of this discussion, the kid that she had met at the taxi stand turns to her and he says, okay, it's agreed that bringing a band here is a great idea. They have agreed they can't pay them a stipend, but they will cover their lodging, their food, the transportation, the hotel, will pay for everything, the production, the marketing, the venue, everything except the airfare. Is that agreeable to you? And my mom she hasn't opened her mouth. She hasn't said a word. And this whole thing just got negotiated right in front of her.
Well, it's a God thing.
It's a God thing. Well, this is what she swears up and down. She's going to be very disappointed that I'm on here arguing that maybe this wasn't a God thing, because it was definitely a God thing, Tim. So 2 days is what it took. When Simon Napier Bell, who was the manager of Wham, tried to get a concert done, he went to Beijing, holed himself up in like a motel, and was just going through the phone book, calling people for 18 months. It took him a year and a half to get something done. My mom has accomplished this in 2 days now. So she comes back to the States. And this is for all you listeners out there who don't, maybe if you're a little younger, once upon a time, we didn't have email and we didn't have cell phones. And so if you wanted to communicate with somebody on the other side of the world, what you had to do is like either put it in the mail, and everything took 6 weeks to get in China, or you sent a fax. So this became faxing became the means of communication between my mom and this guy that was the director of cultural affairs over there. And he said, well, we've allowed a band, we're not saying which band, but we have to pre-approve their lyrics. Um, can you send us the lyrics? Well, obviously, the Newsboys stuff, it's blatantly Christian. And my mom decides this is probably not going to fly. Um, so she'll send lyrics, but she's not going to send the latest album. So she had contacted their manager and said, just can you send me like all the lyrics that Newsboys have ever done? And they've got 6 albums at the time. And so she'd go, and even though they were blatantly Christian, like not every song on the record was overtly religious. Like there's stuff that could get played on secular radio, and instead of God, it says baby, baby, I love you,
Yeah.
whatever.
The stuff
It's
Amy Grant
innocuous.
was doing the same kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
baby, baby. And Amy Grant took a lot of crap for dumbing things down and not being overtly religious. But so my mother went through and found like the 10 most innocuous songs that they had in their catalog, and she sent that to China, but she didn't tell the newsboys that she had done that. Chinese, they read the stuff and they're like, oh yeah, this is harmless. The Communist Party will have no problem with this. We approve these lyrics. So China didn't know that they just hired a Christian band, and the newsboys didn't know that my mom had done this. They didn't know that China didn't know they were a Christian band. So they had no idea what they were about to walk into.
That's insane. I mean, this literally sounds like the makings of a movie. It really
This is
it should be a
this
movie.
is this is a movie in the making. They're turning the story into a movie.
They really are.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Wow,
it's
that's
it's a
awesome.
motion picture in development.
Nice.
So China approved the lyrics, and then the next thing they wanted to know was, all right, is this a big band though? Because we don't want to bring if we're gonna we've only had one Western band ever. If we're gonna have a second one, we don't want like some college band. We need to know this is a big, reputable, like mega star that we're gonna bring into our country. So we want a sheet that has ticket sales in venue size and like just a list of all the places they played and how many people come out to see them. And so my mom got that information and sent it back to them, and they replied to her, "Well, this was sent on letterhead from just some random American. We don't know who you are. We want something with the U.S. government letterhead. Can you get somebody in the government to vouch for the newsboys?" And so my mom had contacted her senator in Pennsylvania. Um, and I'm trying to think who the guy was. I'll come back to it. It'll pop in my head in just a second. Um, but he sent her a letter on with U.S. congressional letterhead that, yeah, the Newsboys are a legit band. I'm vouching for them. They're a big band. You guys are getting the goods. And so China says, okay, the Newsboys are allowed to come. We welcome them with open arms.
Wow.
And then they said, can they come next Wednesday? And my mom she's been working on this for a couple years now, going, but from the time that the idea first popped into her head to when she finally went to China, and then all of this correspondence, we got back to America in like 1990, and it's now up to about 96. She's been working on this for a while. They go, can they come next Wednesday? And mom was like, no, they can't come next Wednesday. That's not how anything works. They're on tour. They're on tour. They're booked up for like the next 18 months. And then I think they have to be in the studio to record an album. They can maybe come in 1998. Does that work for you guys? And China was like, oh, okay, we'll give them dates in 98. And then the dates rolled around, and China reaches out to my mom and says, we made a mistake. We booked the Beijing Acrobats and we need the venue. So we very apologetic. Respectfully, we have to reschedule. And mom's like, well, let me find out when their next availability is. And it was going to be like spring of 99. And then the dates were approaching again, and the Newsboys were in the studio and they were under contract to finish an album, and it was running late. And I had to meet their deadline. So they called mom and said, we can't go. We're stuck in the studio. Can you renegotiate and pick a new set of dates for us? And so my mom finagled that, and they agreed on two concert dates at the end of October 1999. And China said, we will renegotiate this time, but we're not going to renegotiate again. So if whether it's on our part or on their part, we don't care whose fault it is. But if somebody has to cancel for any reason, it's over and we're not going to reschedule. So it was come at the end of October or don't come at all. That was the deal. This is where the story gets good. At the time, the Newsboys were on an international tour. I think they were down in Florida at the time. They were supposed to go to Brazil, and because there was some issue with their visas, and so they were all going to have to go back to Australia to get the paperwork done to be able to get into South America. And so they were not going to be able to make the concert trip. And so they called my mom and said, we're sorry, we can't. And it's now been 9 years in the process. This started in 1990. Now it's 1999. My mom has been working. She's been flitting around the globe. She's been doing the Lord's work. She's been going to bat for Jesus, pulling strings, doing copyright infringement. She's been like She's been hustling to make this thing happen. And so now the newsboys have just let her know 12 days before the concert that they can't make it.
Wow.
If you guys have been paying attention, my mother does not accept excuses. They're like, okay, most people, this would be like a crushing blow to their spirit. Oh, I did everything I could. I got us almost to the finish line, and then things outside of my control happened. What are we to do? Well, my mother decides that she's going to have a concert anyways. So I got a phone call on October 16th, 1999. She calls me in the middle of the night and she goes, Shane, do you know any guitarists that have a passport? I go, what? What are you talking about? And she goes, you know that whole Newsboys thing I've been working on for years? Well, they backed out, but China doesn't know they backed out. So I'm putting a band together. If you're in, we're going to go to China and we're not going to tell the Chinese that we're not the real Newsboys. We're going to step in
Wow.
and we're just going to go over there because they don't know, like they've never seen videos. They haven't ever seen any music videos. They don't know what the people look like. We're just going to go. Are you in or you out? And I'm like, Mother, the communists are going to kill us. Like they're gonna, like when we show up and we sing the first song that has like blatantly Christian, they're gonna throw us in prison. And she's like, I don't care. I don't want to hear your excuses. Are you doing this or not? And I was like, explain to me what your plan is. And she goes, again, my mom is up in Pennsylvania. She goes, I just found a church lead singer, a bass player, and a drummer. She goes, I need you on keyboards and we need a guitarist. So you got to go find a guitarist. The deal is, in 12 days, we're going to China. We're going to show up pretending to be the newsboys. Do you want to be in? Or do I have to go find another keyboardist? And I'm like, this is either going to be the most epic thing in the history of music, or it's going to be a dumpster fire and we're going to get shot or beheaded or something. Either way, I have to be a part of it. I can't miss this. And she goes, okay, this is your mission. And I said, okay, so just real quick. So me and whoever, whatever guitarist I find, we're down here in Florida. We're in West Palm Beach. Your three guys that you found, you guys are up in Pittsburgh. Are the Pittsburgh guys coming down here to Florida to rehearse with us, or are we coming up to Pittsburgh? And Mom goes, no, there's no time for everyone to be flying around. You have to rehearse separately. And I go, explain to me how this is going to work, Mother. And she goes, I want you to pick out 10 songs. And she goes, they don't have to be Newsboy songs. It can be like we ended up doing like Jars of Clay stuff, Audio Adrenaline, DC Talk. She goes, make a mixtape of the 10 songs that you want to cover. My guys up here are going to make a mixtape. On Monday morning, you FedEx them to each other. So on Tuesday, you guys both have a 20-song set list. That's going to be the concert that y'all are going to put on. You rehearse down there. We'll rehearse up here. We'll meet in China and figure it out.
Wow. That's
And
insane.
that's what I tried to tell her because I've been a piano player since I was 4 years old. I've played all over the place. I've toured. And what she's describing to me is not possible. You can't do this. Like as a musician, and I said, Mom, the Newsboys, when they go out on a new tour, they're probably rehearsing for 6 weeks. If they've got, artists that don't have a regular band when they like hire out uh, musicians to play backup for them, those people will rehearse 2 to 4 months in advance. We've got 12 days and these aren't our songs. I'm like, this is impossible, Mom. You can't do this. And she's like, don't tell me why it won't work. It's gonna work. Just say you're in, or I'll go find somebody else. I was like, okay, I'm in. Let's do this. Give us the marching orders. So I don't want to ruin how the story turns out. Obviously, I'm doing an interview with you, so you know I didn't die and I did not get imprisoned. But the second concert that China ever allowed in their borders was what they thought was the newsboys. It was actually us. Um, the communists ended up broadcasting it on all their state media channels. So it went out to about 1 billion people. The only other concert in history that had anywhere close to the number was Live Aid, I think in 84. That went out to like 1.6 billion people. So we played the second largest concert in televised history. We played the second concert any Western band did in China, and we went over there pretending to be somebody who we weren't. So that's the story.
Well, and the rest will have to hear it when we get the book. Uh,
You'll have to read the book.
or what the movie that you mentioned, is that something that is being orchestrated through people piggybacking off of your book, or is that your mom telling that story? Like, how did that movie come about?
It
And
was
when are we going to see it?
the book came about because of his suggestion. So the story that I just told you, I told this story at a business lunch one day about 7 years ago. And after the meeting, a gentleman came up to me and he goes, "That's the craziest story I've ever heard." Um, he goes, "I think it's probably the best story since Argo." Um, I don't know if you guys don't know what Argo was. Once upon a time, back in 1979, a bunch of Americans got taken hostages over in Iran, and the CIA, through posed as a Canadian filmmaking company, they went over to go rescue them. But their cover story while they were there, where they were a Canadian film crew. And it's a fantastic story. It's an audacious story. He goes, "This is the craziest story I've ever heard since Argo." He goes, "Somebody needs to do a movie." I go, "Well, who's going to do it?" He goes, I'm a movie producer." He's an Emmy-winning director. He goes, "I would love it if I'm going to pitch the screenplay or develop the screenplay. I need something like, can you write this down?" And so he tasked me with going and writing the book to give him something so he could go pitch the screenplay. Um, but yeah, now 2 weeks ago, I sent him the copies. And so he's off running around having meetings with Netflix and Amazon Prime and um, whoever out in Hollywood he knows. So
Wow,
somebody's, it's happening.
that is so cool. That is so cool. I mean, wow, what a dream to be able to take your story and your work and your book and have it on a level like that. But well, I definitely want. I'm going to pick up that book. I want to find out what happened. I need to know the rest of the story. So I'll be one of the people buying it and finding out the rest of it. But wow, but it's just a few questions here to wrap up for today. When you look at that, a lot of Christians would probably, and I'm since you said like you came back, you didn't end up in prison for the rest of your life. They didn't kill you. There was some level in which we're assuming that there was some level of success, especially with them broadcasting it to a billion people. Christians are probably going to naturally say, "See, it was a God thing. You can laugh all you want, you foolish atheist, but it was a God thing." How
Yep.
do you respond to that? How do you process what happened and the fact that it didn't end up falling flat on its face over and over through all those little steps of the journey?
Tim, that is such a fantastic question. I have mulled that over. I've had many endless nights because once we deconvert and we stop approaching the world with this like divine, like everything is a divine appointment, we still have to come up with reasons for how and why inexplicable things happen. Because inexplicable
Yep.
things do happen. And this was a great example. And it was a little tough. It was a thing I had to wrestle with because I'm like, how do you explain this? And what I didn't want to do is like I'm sure your listeners are all familiar with the God of the gaps fallacy,
Yep.
where when we don't understand something, we say that had to be God. When The answer is I don't know. That's the answer. If we're being intellectually honest, the most we can say is I don't know, and then you don't tap on extraneous meanings. Once I got to Nashville and I started existing in the entertainment industry, and some of my best friends were, as crazy as this newsboy story is, I've got friends, their books need to be written because there's crazy stuff that happens, and it didn't have anything to do with God or Jesus. It's just when when you have an idea that anything is possible and nothing is going to stop me, the doors that suddenly start opening up to you, you'd be like, oh my gosh, these people who don't think that, I don't know why anyone would ever want to exist in that life. Anything is possible. You can do anything you put your mind to. Nothing is going to stand in my way. Go out and just start making things happen. You're going to be amazed what starts unfolding. And then you don't have to bring in these extraneous things to explain them. The explanation is, we're all 6 degrees of separation from every person on the planet, right? 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon or whatever the thing is. You don't know who you don't know. The person right next to your next door neighbor, they know a guy that knows a person that's the queen of Uganda or the president of Russia or something. Just start striking up conversations. And when people hear this audacious thing that you're trying to get involved in, they're going to want to get involved in too. They're they want to be they want their name attached to it. How can I help you? How can I help you? Can I make an introduction for you? Let me make this phone call. My cousins, friends, doctors, roommate, whatever. They'll start making things happen. Um, so that was sort of my explanation for it. Is my mom to this day will swear up and down it was God, it was divine appointment. There's no such thing as coincidence. It's not serendipity. It's not kismet. It is divine appointment. How else do you explain that man that came up to me at the Beijing taxi stand and asked if he could help? That was an angel. Okay, mom, that's your version of events. You tell your version. That's your story. That's your truth. You run with it. I've got a slightly different story, but for the love of God, mom, I am so happy to be along for the ride. Thank you for doing this.
It's amazing what some of the things that you're talking about. They remind me of the people that focus a lot of their messaging on sort of a secular or new age manifestation messaging, where you hear these crazy stories where somebody's like, yeah, I was living in a trailer park and my rent was $150 a month and had no food, had no real car, and I was like, I'm going to change my life, I'm going to do something, and they pick some kind of business or something. A year later or 5 years later, they're literally living in $1 million house and doing crazy stuff. Like, I manifested it. I don't believe in that either, but it's crazy where it reminds me of that. But you could also, no doubt, ask a Muslim and a Hindu, have you ever seen your God do stuff that's just like, there's no way that there's any other explanation except it was clearly Allah or it was clearly Vishnu, whatever. These gods did amazing things. Or
Yeah.
again, the manifestation stuff, like I manifested it, the universe rewarded my courage, my bravery, my speaking it into existence, and a year later, bam, I went from making 10,000 a year to $1 million a year, and it was all because of my mindset. It's amazing how that worked. But regardless of how people try to explain that away, I will admit there's a part of me that admires that mentality that just says, I will make this happen. Like, I am not going to be intimidated. There's two kinds of things that come to mind for me when I think about this, of mentalities that I've always kind of admired. One of them is your mom's. I think that's amazing to just say, I'm going to do it. And I won't, like, if I'm sure that this is a really good thing, I will make I will make a way. And
Mhm.
obviously in her mind, it's more like, God will make a way, but I will make a way. The other one is when I was doing a pastoral internship, my pastor, I was with him for maybe a year and a half, 2 years, just kind of being his gopher and meeting with him a lot, talking about stuff. And he at one point told me this funny story, and this is a little unrelated, but just to bring it in for the sake of telling my part of my story. He said at one point when I was in seminary, all of us had to do some kind of test where it was like testing our personalities. And it was like a psychological evaluation. And he said his professor that gave these tests pulled him aside when he was done and said, there's something really weird about your results. He said, your results show that you have absolutely no guilt of any kind about anything. It's like
Are you a
that.
psychopath?
That's what he says. Like so you're either telling me the truth and you somehow found a way to healthily let go of your guilt, or you're a psychopath. And he's like, which one is it? And of course, they laughed about it because, like, I know who you are. You're a good person. You're trying to be a pastor. But he's like, according to your exam, unless you literally lied on this exam, you have zero guilt. He's like, is that true? Do you have any guilt at all? Not even like about lust or sexual thoughts. And he's like, I just don't. I see that as a waste of my time and my mental energy. I live by the grace of God, and I believe God forgives me. Everything's covered by the blood. Why would I waste my time, thinking about this stuff? I'm just going to take the power of God and move forward. And I've always thought, you know what? I've wasted far too much of my life thinking, man, I wish I hadn't done that. Or man, I was an idiot. Or, oh, you stumbled there. And I'm so guilty. And certainly the guilt of Christianity. But even after that, just the guilt of thinking, I could have done better. I could have done better. That perfectionism that's in you. I wish I could have done better. And, maybe I should have held off on doing that one until I was, at a plus level. And, is B plus or A minus acceptable? All this guilt stuff. And those two mentalities of not having guilt and being able to say, I will do it. Like I can do it. I'm not going to be intimidated by anything. I will be brave and strong no matter how bad the storm gets. I love those mentalities. And I would love to honestly look back at, 5 or 10 years from now and say, yeah, you really did adopt those mentalities deeply, and they profoundly affected your path in awesome ways. But your mom sounds very interesting. What does she think about the idea that it's turning into a movie?
She's thrilled. When she was here for Christmas, I actually introduced her to the guy who's trying to pitch the movie. So we went to lunch and they got to know each other, and he thought she was a hoot. She didn't know when to stop talking because she never does. And so it was supposed to be an hour and a half lunch. It turned into 4 hours with her because she goes, the movie, you have to make sure that God is the star of the movie.
Of course.
Don't don't dumb down. God is he's the reason. So you have to make sure it's all God. And Steve was like, ma'am, whatever you say. We're so
Are they considering putting her in as herself, as the actress?
well, she's gonna, we're 25 years removed from events.
Yeah.
So my mom, she's 69, 68. Um, so when this happened, she was like 40. So we're gonna have to find a 40-year-old to play her.
Right.
But there has to be a role for her somewhere, even if it's just like a tangent. Like she can play the airline attendant, like just serving to something. She has to be in it. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's a hoot.
That's
I love
crazy.
her to death. She's amazing.
Well, I definitely want to find out whenever it does become a movie and then gets put on some platform. Please, reach out. Let me know. We want to know how it's going, and I would love to just kind of hear what feedback you get as to whether the feedback ends up being more like I could see a lot of Christians saying "Hallelujah, praise the Lord," and
Mhm.
of course a lot of other people saying like you were putting an incredible amount of people at an overwhelming level of danger that's just plain old stupid. Like, why would you put that many people's lives at risk their children back at home are going to lose their parents. Their parents are going to be stuck in a prison in China. Like, this is so unacceptable for what, like an hour and a half, 2 hour concert in China, like one
Yeah,
day.
it
You're
was
going to
too
ruin
much.
entire lives.
That was one of the things that I really did spend some time thinking on because, like, I don't know if you or your audience knows who Jim Elliot is. He
Yeah,
was a missionary that went to Ecuador and he ended up getting killed by the cannibals over there. But he thought that was his calling. And it was a very popular story. I think he died in like 79 or somewhere back in the 70s. But his story became a book, and it was a book that everybody in the church talked about. It didn't matter what level, like if you were up in the with the adults or down with the kids in Sunday school, they were talking about Jim Elliot and that he went and he gave his life for the Lord. And so it was a thing that all of us had in our head was if you die, that's okay, because that's the most, how like the Vikings thought about Valhalla. This is the most glorious way to go out in battle. That's sort of the mentality that we had. And we would do incredibly stupid stuff because we go, well, what's the worst that could happen? They could kill us, and that's the greatest thing that could happen. You go out on your shield for Jesus. So let them kill me. I win. I win life if they kill me for Christ.
Mm. When I
Yeah.
was at Lancaster Bible College, that was a huge deal. They were talking about that story a lot. It was like the goal is to, consider missions, and remember that quote that it seemed like everybody, I think it was maybe even been put into a song at some point, but the one of from Jim Elliott, he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose.
You know,
And it was like everybody
Scott
was
Wesley
quoting that all the
Brown
time.
was the singer that was the artist that did that song.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like on blast in at least in Christian college world and church world. But yeah, it's amazing. And yet you look at that and you think, like, yeah, if this worldview were accurate, if that God were real, then yeah, I could see why that does make sense. And that was my goal. My goal was, as you remember, I was telling you the first time we chatted, I wanted to be a missionary. My goal was to work with New Tribes Mission, which now called Ethnos 360, to be a Bible translator in a jungle tribal environment, to plant a tribal church. And I thought, what a way to go out. Like, what if you get some kind of weird disease or get bit by something and it takes you out? Like, who cares? You want to be spent for Christ. There's no better way than to have your life wasted for the sake of the gospel and the kingdom. But that's the big question is this worldview accurate? And if this worldview is mythology, then like Paul says, you are of all people to be most pitied. And I'm really sad to think of it, but people like your mom are of all people to be most pitied. There is no resurrection from the dead, and Jesus is not God, and Yahweh is not God. The Bible is not divine. This is a trash worldview, and it's a shame that she is like so many of us. She's unless she realizes where this mythology came from and that it's truly just another version of a Greco-Roman mystery cult, heavily copied from other religions of the day. She's going to go to her deathbed and never live a day of her life. And it's just crazy. It shudders, makes me shudder inside to think I could have followed that path. I mean, I think that a lot. That was one of the biggest reasons that when I deconverted, I almost started laughing because I was like, oh my gosh, like I, despite all the pain of like, I wanted to go to heaven and I still do. I wish I could. I wanted to go to heaven. I wanted the afterlife. I wanted it all to be true. I thought it was real. It was like you could have lived your entire life thinking this was all real. And you could have easily, especially if like everything had gone my way in Christendom and my Christian experience, you could have just followed the typical traditional path and you would have never lived your life. And I was like, at least I probably most likely have at least some time to live my real life and to wake up. It was like escaping from the Matrix. Like, do I want the Matrix to have been real? Yeah, it seemed like a really nice world, but I'd rather know the truth. I'd rather, the unexamined life is not worth living. I'd rather know the truth. And wow, but just I feel
Testify,
so bad.
testify.
I feel bad for your mom, but it's just if it had been real, that would have been a
You
great
know,
life. It's
here's
not.
why
It's
you shouldn't.
mythology.
Here's why you shouldn't feel bad for her. I mean, you should a little bit, and I do a little bit, a little bit. I think people live across the spectrum, and there are some people who can just get up and motivate themselves to go do a thing. They get up at 5 a.m. and go jog 6 miles, whatever it is, go run a marathon, go stage a concert for Christ. And there's a bunch of different reasons people have for what makes them do it. And if you don't have the personal motivation, but you have the God motivation, that's the thing that gets you up. Hey, you're still doing it. You still want to accomplish that task. You should be pat yourself on the back because you still did the thing. You needed a reason, a motivator. That's not something I agree with. I have a different motivator, but at least you freaking did it. Holy crap. If that's the thing that keeps you going, that makes you tick.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really want to say don't give it up because I do sort of wish. I think the society is a little bit effed up at the moment because there are too many people who would that is their motivator and that makes all the decisions for them. But it's not all bad. It's like 98% bad. It's
Yeah.
just the 98% that give the rest of them a bad name.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, plus the charity stuff. You say like I'm motivated by my God to go feed the poor and people that don't have a meal today. I want to give the homeless a place to live. Like, yeah, if you needed God to do that, then and if you didn't have God, you would have never done that. You would have never cared about your neighbor without the fear of hell or the gift of heaven or the motivation of the cross and the gospel. Like if that's what it took for you to look at your neighbor with benevolence and kindness and compassion, Sure,
Mhm.
all like if you truly would be just a nasty, selfish person otherwise, yeah, cling on to
Thank,
your God and do something
thank
good for
God
the
that
world.
you've got that thing. Yeah,
Yeah, agreed, agreed. It is fascinating too with the topic of nihilism. I've come to the conclusion, just the way I describe it to myself, I am absolutely an atheist, materialist, nihilist. I don't think any of this matters in the end. But I've come to the conclusion you can't live there. You have to. It's weird. You have to almost live like you can mentally, philosophically assent to nihilism, but you have to somehow live as if you're not adhering to that. Otherwise, it's just too depressing. You have to live as if there is a goal, there is a motivation, there's something to shoot for. I mean, to me, it's I could say stuff like I want to leave this planet better than I found it. I want to give my kids a better shot at life than I did. But at the end of
absolutely.
the day, we're all going to turn back to dirt and to nothing. I don't think there's a soul or a spirit that goes on. So it's like, well, what does it matter then in the end? And it's like it's weird. You kind of have to have some kind of motivation. And to me, it's like not quite tricking myself, but it's like you're saying I'm going to live as if it matters, even though I know that it doesn't. It's weird.
Well, here's the thing. If it doesn't matter, and this is very nihilistic. Actually, this is going to be really, really nihilistic, and now I kind of feel gross just even saying it. Um, it doesn't all matter, and then we're all going to be gone. We'll be dust, specks, dust in the wind. But the thing that does matter is us being here. While we're here, we live here. What kind of place do we want to inhabit while we're here? We can make this the best we can make it, or we can make it miserable. What are we going to do here? Is it this belief that it's meaning this is just the dress rehearsal for the big show later? If so, let's make the dress show as pleasant and enjoyable as we can. Do if the thing that makes you make this place be good is that you think you're going to get a reward or avoid a punishment, think that because I still have to share the highway with you. We're driving down the same road. And if that's the thing that keeps you from like swerving over into my car, man, think it. Just let's we all have to be here. We don't have to be in the next place. That's probably make believe. We do have to be here. So while we're here, how do we make this place the best possible experience for all of us?
Yeah. I've heard a lot of people too express that whole shuddering mentality of like where Christians might say, now that you're an atheist, you don't really have a morality, and like what's keeping you from murdering and raping as much as you want to. And of course, people like Penn and Hitchens would say, well, I do rape and murder as much as I want to, and the much as I want to is zero. But
Yeah,
it makes you
that's
think
such
like
a great line.
turning it back to them. It's like so you're telling me that if you ever deconvert yourself, like if you ever end up deconverting, you're telling me that your logic says that you immediately will want to rape and murder? Like, stay a Christian. Stay a Christian till the day you die. If that's the only thing holding you back, that's kind of scary. And I know they don't mean it necessarily in the fullest sense like that, but that's kind of the way they imply it. Is like if it weren't for God, we'd all be doing this horrible things to each other. And it's like, well, number one, when you look back at human history, when you look back, back at hominins overall, there was a time hundreds of thousands of years ago when we all did do that. We all did murder each other, and we were, clearly cannibals. We were clearly raping each other, like left and right. There was no courts, there were no police. That was what we came from. But we evolved a consciousness that eventually said we need to pursue the best for each other and for ourselves, and collectively being respectful and having rights, giving each other those rights is more important than where we came from with the savagery. We have done some great things with human rights, but at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, that's where we have come from, but we're better now. And it's like, don't you think that you can say to yourself as even as a Christian, I would hope they would think through this, say, whether or not there's a God, I can admit that I need to be kind to my neighbor and respect their right to life and to safety and security. And it blows my mind that they don't think through that and that they accuse us, especially when you add in the psychopathic nature of the Yahweh character. And you're like, so Yahweh commands you to commit genocide, land theft, slavery, child brides, stoning, and worse, genital mutilation. And now that I've escaped Christianity, you're asking me where my morality is coming from? Like, anyone that follows Yahweh is an absolute psychopath. He is, I mean, and when you think monstrous thoughts long enough, you become a monster, you know?
Well, here was an analogy that I've always used. There was a movie that came out in the mid 90s called Wolf. It's a werewolf movie with Jack Nicholson. And there's a scene towards the end where he's finally figured out that he is a werewolf, and he realizes what a danger he is to other people. And so he volunteers to be chained up. He goes out to the stable, and these big iron chains that they use to keep the horses in place, he puts it on himself and says, the full moon's coming. Just leave me in here. Don't let me loose. I always thought that was a great kind of parallel. If you understand that you are a monster, if you're making an effort to do a thing that controls you so we don't have to deal with the wolf, I do it like I wish you weren't a wolf, a werewolf. I would prefer that you do not eat my throat. I very much like my throat. Um, but if you have the wherewithal to chain yourself up because you know what your worst impulses are, that's sort of admirable. I can appreciate that. So you just go ahead and you keep putting that iron shackle on your throat if that's the thing. Um, if that's the thing that keeps you from not murdering my familiars, I am grateful to whatever helps them sleep. So yeah, have at it.
Yeah, it's like a crutch of sorts. It's funny that when you mentioned that, that makes me think. Wallace and Gromit, the claymation, the
Yeah.
British claymation. There's a movie called The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, where he becomes like a
Yes.
rat. It makes me wonder if it's based on that movie with Jack Nicholson. Anyway, well, I'm so glad that you're continuing to create and to tell your story and your background. Just we love you. I mean, at this point, you've become a staple and a pillar of the channel. You've been here twice. We're going to make sure we get you back at least 3 times for that trifecta when the time is right. But I just appreciate so much you being willing to speak up and tell your story and to kind of dialogue about some of these ideas regarding deconversion. Did you have any final thoughts you can send us away with to kind of
I absolutely do have a final thought.
please?
So my goal with this story was one to give to let the world know what a blessing my mother is. I wanted to honor her by doing this. If you go into this book thinking I'm going to like throw Christianity under the bus, this was basically a love letter to the things, all the fondness that I have for the. I'm not in it now, but it wasn't all bad. There's not going to be any long diatribes, or that's a different book. Go get Conspiracy Christianity. It was to honor my mother. It was to tell some jokes, and it was to convince people that every single one of you are capable of doing impossible things you never imagined. Sometimes you just need somebody else to go do the crazy thing, to go, hey, look at this. Hey y'all, hold my beer, watch this. You just need to see it. You need to see somebody doing it first, but you're all capable of it. And what I would like to do is just encourage all of your listeners. Impossible is nothing. It's trite. It's a Nike commercial. It's a platitude, but impossible really is nothing. You are capable of things you've never imagined. Go conquer life.
I love it. Great word. What a great word. And I feel like for so many of us, that really is where we're at, where we feel like we're trying to find out what are we going to do now with the rest of our lives, and what is our motivation, and what's our goal, and where do we find meaning and purpose. Not that we find it, but we create it. But what is the next step? And for a lot of us, the bravery that it took to escape Christianity was overwhelming. But it's like that same bravery is still there. So go move some big rocks, do some amazing things. And I loved the idea of dreaming a dream and having aspirations that are so big that it almost scares you. It's like for me to get from here, where I've done nothing towards that goal, to getting to that goal, all that work in between is absolutely overwhelming, intimidating, and
Terrifying.
scaring as
It's
hell. Yeah,
fine.
terrifying and scary as hell. And then to say, I can do it. Like that's hard. I remember when I was a custom cabinet maker for many years, and I worked for this real big Italian guy. And one of the best lessons he ever taught me was that sort of related to this. I remember we would go to a site, and we would talk about what the customer was wanting. A cabinet this and this, this dimension. You need to run wires here, pipes here. crazy stuff, just completely rearranging rooms and houses, and major upsets to walls and this and that. And there were times, many times, when we would say, I'd say his name was Steve, like, Steve, I'm looking at what they're asking for, and I don't think there's a way we can do it. Like, this doesn't work. And he'd be like, yeah, you're right. Like, I see it. There's no way we can do it. This is impossible the way they're describing it. They're asking for the moon, and it just logically doesn't work. And several times in a row, he would have this little twinkle in his eye and look at me. He's like, "So how are we going to do it?" And I mean, we figured out so much stuff. I was like, I have no idea how we figured that out.
I love
Just
that idea.
crazy
I
stuff.
love
But
that.
he did, and he put that mentality in me, and I was so appreciative of that, because that, beyond just learning how to use all the tools and do find cabinetry, was like just that mentality. It got into your psyche.
Well, I will leave you all with my favorite quote of all time.
Please.
It's what I have attached to my email signature and all my emails. It's an ancient Chinese proverb. It just says, the man who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the man doing it. Go out there and do it. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do it.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Awesome stuff. Preach it, brother. Well, I'll just wrap up by saying we've been speaking with Shane Almgren. Shane, thank you so much. I love when you come on the channel. Love your presence. Love what you're doing. Love your books. And I'll be, again, one of the people that's going to be picking up your new book. I can't wait to see it in the movie form. Can't wait to have you back for the third interview. But thank you so much. Great to hear your story today. And again, keep up the great work.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Shane.